Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another reading, Listen with Vobes. It's nice to be back on the 31st of December 2020, the last of these this year. Next year, we will carry on where we left off, if you're up for it. Very nice of you to come along. My phone is buzzing, please ignore that. I have my jacket on, I have my jumper on, I have a shirt on, I have a t-shirt on, and the fire is on. I have long johns on and a pair of trousers on, obviously. I must get myself another pair of gloves. I went out filming today and it was so cold. There was a cold wind, although it was only about 1 degree out there, or even 0 degrees. Normally that doesn't bother me. But the searing cold wind off the South Downs, and I didn't have any gloves on, really hurt my hands. I've never had that before where it was just so painful. And I had to stop filming and put everything away and put my hands in my pockets and just try and find a bit of sunshine to get into and just thaw them out. It was quite grueling, actually. So I need to get some gloves sorted. But it's much warmer in here than outside, although my house is a bit like as a morgue, quite cold. Lee Lawson says that she's been on the champagne. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, hello to everybody. Hello to the lovely Julia. Very nice to see you out there. And to Turbo Stream, to John F., to Billabong O'Neill, and who we got else out there? We've got Audrey Forbes Hamilton. Nice to see you. Charlie Cooper. Good to see you. Justine Jones is also there. John Morris, hello to you. Dave over yonder. Sean's Golden Dairy. No, that's next week's name, isn't it? Sean's Golden Dairy. That's next week's title. Who else have we got? Lee Lawson, who's been on the champagne. Blimey, it's the life of Riley for some. I've just got a lowly cup of tea here. And Alan Sandell, hello to you. Steve G, good afternoon. And Philip Hammond and Mary, lovely to see you. And Turbo Stream is out there. Warmer outside, yeah, blooming is. I'm looking forward to my next set of jumpers that are going to be coming. I have commissioned Mary to get knitting. I can need some more. Do you do long johns as well? I want an all-in-one underneath suit is what I need. Ben Reeve, he says, my old skeef stuff is still useful for stopping those penetrating winds. I once skied in Sunday River, and I think it was up to -40 to -50 degrees with the wind chill factor on top of the mountains. Blimey, that does sound cold. It's my feet that I can feel now are cold. But hey-ho. There was something else I was going to... couldn't decide where Birminghamshire was, says Billabong O'Neill. Anyway, and Justine Jones says, perhaps you should ask Mary to knit you a blanket for your knees. Actually, I do have a blanket. Yes, I should do that. Poor old sod, sitting here with a blanket on his knees. Hello, everybody. I don't know how long I'm going to last, but I'll do my... Oh, dear. Right. We are reading the next part, which is actually chapter 3 of Children of the Archbishop by Norman Collins. I hope you enjoy it. And this will be our last reading this year. Have no fear. Next year we will start at the same time. Oh, I tell you what, a cup of tea in cold weather like this is ideal. Lee Lawson says, I will sit with my feet in a cardboard box if I am working in a chilly room. Oh, right. In a cardboard box. Do you put anything in the cardboard box? Chapter 3. There. I think you'll find that's everything. Canon Mallow tried to smile reassuringly and folded his hands across his waistcoat. One by one he had ticked off the items on his fingers. The bank passbook, the current ledger, the sundries, the file of birth certificates, the medical reports. And now, relieved of all responsibility, he was facing his successor across the wide expanse of bare, polished mahogany. Because it was his reading glasses that he was wearing, he could not see Dr. Samuel Trump very plainly. He could hardly see him at all, in fact, but he still remembered quite enough about him, and as he sat there, peering and frowning slightly, he could still discern, though only smudgily, mistily, like something seen through a damp window pane, the large, egg-shaped head, the sharp grey eyes, deep-set and very close together, the massive caterpillar eyebrows. It was not, however, merely the shape of the visitor's head that was worrying Canon Mallow. It was the way up it was. The pointed end was on top, and rising above the almost too high clerical collar, it looked exactly as though it had been carelessly inserted upside down into a clean white egg cup. But perhaps that was the only effect of seeing the head silhouetted so sharply against the light. Canon Mallow had always meant to move his desk round so that the light should not be full on his face, and more than once he had called in Sergeant Chiswick and his predecessors and asked them to do something about it, but when it actually came to it, he had never been able to decide where else the desk should go. But this was dreadful. While he'd been thinking about himself, he'd forgotten all about his visitor, and the very last thing he wanted was to appear off-hand or discourteous. So, putting his two hands on the tabletop, he prepared to rise politely. But it was a low chair and a high tabletop, and when finally Canon Mallow had struggled up, it was rather in a manner of a child pulling himself onto his feet in a playpen. "Well," he said, smiling vaguely into the light as he emerged, "and now we shall go round and see the rest of the hospital." "But the laundry accounts," his successor reminded him. "Weren't you going to show me the laundry accounts?" The voice that had spoken was nasal and rather high-pitched. There was a serrated metallic edge to it, as though inside the egg wheels were rasping. Canon Mallow decided that he did not like the sound of it. It was not the sort of voice at all for carrying on conversation. It was simply a sharp, effective instrument for asking questions and requiring answers. Canon Mallow smiled again, apologetically this time. Yes, he said. "How silly of me. They're all here. The figures, I mean." He opened the large leather volume with the vertical cash columns and pointed triumphantly to figures in red on the last page. "There you are," he said. "Nearly £200 out. It was worse last year." "And how long has it been going on?" Canon Mallow paused thoughtfully for a moment. As long as I can remember," he replied. "You see, it's always made a loss, our laundry." "Then it must stop." But Canon Mallow only shook his head. "I'm afraid it's not so easy as that," he explained. "I've often tried to stop it, but it's the cost of things, you know, soap powder and soda and starch and all that. They're what run away with the money. And, of course, the coal. There's a tremendous coal bill." "Other laundries pay?" the visitor marked severely. "Do they?" asked Canon Mallow, and hesitated. "Oh, yes. Well, of course," he added. "I suppose they must do, or people wouldn't keep going on running them, would they?" Dr. Trump ignored the question. "Is our machinery out of date?" he asked. Canon Mallow considered this point carefully. "I don't think it can be that," he said slowly, "because you see, we don't use machinery. Not really. It's just wash tubs and ironing tables and things. Oh, and mangles. I suppose you might call a mangle a machine, but I don't think a mangle ever really goes out of date. Mangles are all very much the same, aren't they? Is the turnover sufficient? Sufficient for what? To make a profit? Canon Mallow paused again. Well, put like that, I don't see how it can be, because if it was, we wouldn't be making a loss now, would we? We might, or we might not. Dr. Trump's lips came together again and remained pursed up after he'd spoken. Do the girls work hard enough? He demanded at last. And at that, Canon Mallow flushed. Good gracious, yes, he said. You wouldn't find a nicer lot of girls anywhere in England. And in that heat too. And all the steam. Why, they're a lesson to every one of us. Then I, for one, would like to learn, the visitor answered. Let's go to the laundry first. The route back from the laundry lay along a worn asphalt pathway that stopped abruptly at a brick wall with a narrow Gothic doorway in the middle of it. The wall was high, and a crest of broken glass ran along the top. Canon Mallow paused. It may have been the act of pressing down the latch that reminded him, for he suddenly recalled that he was conducting a visitor. This leads through into the boys' side, he said pleasantly, like a guide indulging in a professional small talk of his calling. From the girls? Dr. Trump asked pointedly. Yes, that's right, Canon Mallow replied. Senior boys one side, girls the other. It is not kept locked? Canon Mallow shook his head. There used to be a key once, he said. What happens at night? Canon Mallow looked blankly towards him. Why, nothing, he replied. They're all asleep by then. But while he was speaking, Dr. Trump had removed from his pocket a small black notebook. It was a new notebook, and at the top of the first page, Dr. Trump wrote a single word. Key. Dr. Trump. There's a name. Alan Sandor says, who's the nosy visitor? Canon Mallow is he's the reverend of the place at Archbishop, Archbishop's Bodkin's something hospital. I forget what the name of it is now. The Archbishop Bodkin Hospital. That's what it is. And Canon Mallow is the reverend there who's retiring, and this is the new person who's taking over. So he's going to be the new one. So we've got this nice, jolly, friendly, sort of relaxed, slightly dotty canon, and the new chap who's taking over his duties, whatever they are, is now taking on the job. And what would you like to show me next? Canon Mallow suddenly... Oh, sorry, wrong person. And what would you like to show me next? Canon Mallow suddenly heard Dr. Trump addressing him. You're still... Oh, yes, he's the warden. You're still warden here until tomorrow, remember? Still warden? Why, yes, he supposed he was. He hadn't thought of any formal itinerary. It was just going round the place in the way that he'd always done. He was about to suggest the sick ward, because children, the children, always like to see a new face, even possibly Dr. Trump's, when the top of the Founders Tower caught his eye. It was the most imposing feature of the hospital, the Founders Tower. It rose, proud and dominant, like a vast and gritty bombe glacée. I guess that's like an ice cream, is it? In two contrasting shades of brickwork. Supported in the structure was a clock with four faces. The big bell, an ornamental bronze weather clock, weathercock, and a narrow balcony enclosed by a frilly railing bearing an iron founder's version of an acanthus leaf. The moment which Canon Mallow chose to draw Dr. Trump's attention to the tower was an auspicious one. The late afternoon sun, slanting through the limes of St. Mark's Avenue, lit up the pile with a warm amber light, as though the bricks themselves were glowing. And on top, the bronze weathercock blazed like a firework. Canon Mallow balanced himself on his heels and peered upwards. Because he was wearing his reading spectacles, he had left his others somewhere in the study, he could see no more than a dim blurred streak stretching upward into the sky. But he had seen it often enough before, and with a wave of his hand he indicated it. "That," he said, not very revealing, "is the tower." "The Founder's Tower," Dr. Trump corrected him. Within the past 24 hours, Dr. Trump had read the handbook of the hospital carefully and thoroughly, starting at the beginning and marking the important passages in pencil as he came to them, and he knew all about it. He knew more than Canon Mallow. That was obvious. Just so," Canon Mallow answered casually. "The Founder's Tower, we usually call it the Tower." Dr. Trump's eyebrows rose a little. "A pity," he said. "Our founder's memory is a trust handed down to us." "Oh, I'm not worried about that," Canon Mallow replied easily. "It was the children the Archbishop cared for, not towers. He never even knew about the tower. It was after his time." "But not after ours," Dr. Trump began, and then stopped himself. There was no point in stressing it. He paused. "Can I go up?" he asked. Canon Mallow seemed surprised. "Well, you can," he said. "But I shouldn't if I was you. You see, it's been shut up for years." "Shut?" Dr. Trump repeated. "Yes, that's right," Canon Mallow told him. "I closed it after one of the governors had got taken ill up there. It was a long time ago now." "I take it that you have no objection to my going up?" Dr. Trump asked. "Objection?" Canon Mallow said in astonishment. "Good gracious, no. After all, it's your tower now, or will be tomorrow, but do be careful." The reply was so charming, so placating, that Dr. Trump felt mollified completely. His face lit up for a moment in a warm, natural smile. "Then perhaps you wouldn't mind waiting for me," he said. There was a delay, a kind of delay that smelt of inefficiency, while Sergeant Chiswick found the keys. And Dr. Trump was not pleased to discover that the stout wooden door had warped so badly that it required the combination efforts of himself and Sergeant Chiswick to open it. He was so much displeased, in fact, that he declined Sergeant Chiswick's suggestion that he should go up with him. He would mount alone. And he was not sorry that he had got rid of the man. There was something exciting, yes, strangely exciting, about being alone in the tower this way. It was the first time in his life that he'd ever owned a tower, and he didn't want to share the experience with anyone. He was even more pleased to be alone when he found out how out of breath he was. Badly out of breath, winded, in short. And this shocked him. It showed that he must be out of condition, and as he mounted, he began to prescribe himself his own treatment. "I must do exercises," he told himself, "regular exercises. Hip bending, touching the toes, lifting the knees to strengthen the stomach muscles, prone falling, Swedish clubs. I must be fit." The prospect of the exercises pleased him. There was that note of self-discipline, of martyrdom almost, that was distinctly gratifying. And above all things, it would be entirely private. If he was careful to put the Swedish clubs away in the wardrobe afterwards, no one was to know that he had ever needed the toning up process. When at last he reached the balcony, he was blinded as well as breathless. The early evening sun was shining full into the top of the doorway like a lighthouse beam. Dr. Trump put his hand up to shade his eyes, and the view was certainly reward enough. The hospital spread out beneath him, and was like a toy farm. He could see the sports field, the kitchen gardens, the girls' playground, the boys, the high-ranking roof of the main hall, the little doll's house that was the warden's lodging, set on its own strip of bright green baize, the entrance gateway, the laundry block. All around ran the great wall, 15 feet high, and without a break except where the spiked gates were let into. It enclosed the landscape. I've got an itchy nose. Which is not what you wanted to know about, but there you are. But this is magnificent, Dr. Trump told himself. It will be my first task to reopen the tower, my very first. Then Dr. Trump cast his eyes to the ground beneath him. There, directly below, stood Canon Mallow, so violently foreshortened. Excuse me. Sorry, that's just a funny, unexpected phrase. I do beg your pardon. Have another drink of tea, why don't you, Mr. Vobes? Thanks, I will. Oh, that tickled me. Yes. So, there directly below stood Canon Mallow, so violently foreshortened that his tips of his toes were emerging from underneath his chin. His pink round head looked ridiculous with the fringe of white hair surrounding it. Ridiculous, yes, that was exactly the right word. Not that it mattered at any moment. Any longer, the man was already on his way out, practically packed up and ready for dispatch. His futility, his fumblings did not matter any more. By tomorrow, the hospital would be in other and far stronger hands, in Dr. Trump's hands, in fact. Then, obscured by a cloud, the sun disappeared abruptly. It grew colder. Only the coolness of the breeze remained. Striking against his forehead, it chilled him. Dr. Trump shivered. It was as though inside him the sunlight had gone out too, and it was he himself who had extinguished it. He had recognised his earlier mood of exaltation for what it was. Pride. Arrogant, spiritual pride. "Oh God, make me humble," he said devoutly. "Make me worthy of my new vocation." And that is the end of chapter 3. We are now on chapter 4. Hope you're still enjoying it. And as eager as he was to get started, it seemed to Dr. Trump next day as though he could never get rid of Canon Mallow after all. The man was so abnormally slow and absent-minded. He did things, even little unnecessary things, like showing Dr. Trump where the gas meter was, twice, even 3 times. He pottered, and above all, he wasted his time with the children. Indeed, from the way he said goodbye to them, you might have thought that they were his own children. 2 of them in particular. One of these was Ginger, a small boy who had thrown the inkwell. Dr. Trump had already been sizing him up as someone who would be all the better for not having too much notice taken out of him. And the other was Sweetie, also an exhibitionist kind of child, Dr. Trump had noticed. It was silly, doubtfully silly, therefore, of Canon Mallow to make such a fuss of saying goodbye to her. He had even taken her up in his arms and kissed her, finally giving her a farewell 6pence just as he was leaving. Dr. Trump had promptly confiscated the sixpence, but there had been nothing that he could do about the kisses. Anyhow, all that was over now. He had really said goodbye to Canon Mallow for the last time. In point of fact, he had thought that the last time was the last time, but he had not known then that at the end of St. Mark's Avenue, Canon Mallow would suddenly tell the taxi to return to Archbishop Bodkin Hospital because he'd just discovered that he'd come away with all the keys. 7:16 a.m. 7:16 a.m. precisely, on Monday, the 24th of September, 1924. And there, alone under the sheets of the double bed in the front bedroom of the warden's lodging, lay the new warden, Dr. Trump, propped up against the pillows and sipping his early morning tea. It was his one personal indulgence, this tea, drunk scalding hot and, since it was solitary drinking, punctuated between the gulps with loud exhalations after long drawn-out sighs. But even in this self-indulgence he did not entirely lose control. Not once, for example, had any housekeeper of his ever found him sleeping when she entered. There was indeed a strict drill in such matters. The knock at the door, the pause, the slow, deliberate "come in," and by the time the woman was actually inside his bedchamber, Dr. Trump would be sitting up, wide awake, tidy. He kept a little pocket comb on the sideboard, on the bedside table, especially for the purpose, and smiling. It was a recurrent fear of his, especially when he'd been overworking, that he might die in the night suddenly without warning, and then, well, he shuddered to think of what awfulness, what grim, unposed mortality would greet his domestic in the morning. But last night had proved to be one of his lucky ones. He had not died during the night, of course. He remembered remarkably well, in fact. He felt remarkably well, in fact, In those quiet minutes before he rose at 7:30, they were probably the best of the whole day for clear thinking. This very morning, for instance, he saw things clearly and distinctly as a whole, with himself as a separate and important part of the intricate of them. Oh, wait a minute, I think I've skipped. Oh, no, sorry. The text is very small, and sometimes my one eye jumps about. This morning, for instance, he saw things clearly and distinctly as a whole, with himself as a separate and important part of the whole. He was a cog, a breathing sentinel cog in the vast, intricate machine of life. And for a cog, he was not doing so badly. $7.50 per annum was not exactly a flea bite, especially when he was in an 8-roomed house thrown in, and, of course, washing. Nor was it nothing for one particular cog to be responsible for the entire well-being and livelihood of 545 other cogs, 45 of whom were full-sized adult cogs. He had not yet had time to get to grips with any of them, the male or female, as human beings. He had not explored, probed, analysed them, although already, though, he recognised that there was some pretty promising probing to be done. Take Mr. Paverius, the organist, for example. A trifle too much inclined, perhaps, to the arpeggio and the cadenza, but an excellent church organist nevertheless, and entirely in Dr. Trump's power. Helpless and inextricably bound, and why? All because of what had happened 13 years before in the fortune-teller's booth at a charity garden party under the church auspices near Banbury. There was a complete dossier of the incident attached to Mr. Paverius's private file, locked away in the filing cabinet, marked Staff Confidential. By now, Dr. Trump knew that dossier by heart. Yes, practically by heart, knew why the name on the index tab was simply Mr. S. Paverius and not the Reverend Sidney Paverius, B.D., knew in fact as much as the whole shameful incident as though he had been there in the rectory meadow on that sunny August afternoon. Elderberry wine was at the bottom of it. That much was admitted on both sides. But who had taken it? The visiting curate or the swarthy fortune-teller? The man or the woman? Here the evidence rioted in conflict, and even the public analyst's report on the specimen of the brew was ruled inadmissible, because the vicar's sister had confessed that, dismayed by its too obvious potency, she had speedily diluted the remainder. Shorn of its divergences, the story was all too plain, too sordid, too heavily laden with original sin. The Reverend Sidney Paverius, having strongly paid his sixpence, had gone inside the booth, ostensibly to have his palm read. Such operations are normally silent, and at most muttered. But a moment later, on this occasion, a shrill scream had penetrated the canvas flaps, and this was followed by a gasp, some said a droken oath, and a loud crash as first a folding table, folded too completely, gave way, and then, in the melee, the little tent itself shut up and collapsed. By the time the rescue party, 2 churchwardens and a cowhand, had distangled the guy ropes and lifted up the billowing canvas, an astonishing sight greeted them. The curate and the brunette daughter of the rural dean were locked together in a fierce and terrible embrace. Her gypsy costume had been ripped open, and he had been bitten in the right ear. On the grass at their feet lay a book of raffle tickets, the fortune-telling crystal, a dead goldfish, squashed practically flat, like a bright pink place, with its shattered bowl all around it, and key evidence for the defence, a custard glass with elderberry wine stains in it. Both sides were adamant and unbudgeable. He had borne down on her. He had borne down on her, she claimed. She had flung herself on him, he contended. She had been secretly tippling when he entered. He had drunkenly tottered in, cup in hand. She was desperately struggling to escape when the table gave way. He was fleeing from temptation when he had caught his foot in the tent pole. None of it mattered, however. Not now. The findings were ultimately in favour of the dean's daughter, and Mr. Paverius, bearing an imperishable scar on one lobe, was reduced to organist in a charity institution. As Dr. Trump sipped noisily at his tea, he smiled inwardly. He suspected that it might have been for all the wrong reasons that his predecessor had taken on such a man. There had probably been sentiment behind the decision. But how right? An organist, without references, was a pearl among employers. If Dr. Trump ordered him to do anything, stoke the boilers, sweep out the nave, black his boots even, the man could not possibly afford to refuse. And his £110 per annum was an investment. For never in any conceivable circumstances would Mr. Paverius be bothering him for an increase. Oh dear. Blooming buffering. Oh no, is it buffering? Oh no. Crikey. Is it buffering for everybody, or... I hope it's not buffering. Sorry, my glasses are slightly askew, aren't they? I don't know why that is. But Dr. Trump had more... Hang on, get them in the right place. But Dr. Trump had more than the proverbial ruin of Mr. Paverius on his mind. He had Dame Eleanor, a remarkable woman, Dame Eleanor, or Eleanor, maybe, Dame Eleanor. A remarkable woman, Dame Eleanor, a figure, an institution, almost in fact a syndicate. Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Archbishop Bodkin Hospital. She was also the founder of GCS, Guild of Christian Soldiers, president of the Unmarried Mothers Reclamation Society, treasurer of the Junior League of Innocents, campaigns director of the Abstinence Crusade of Great Britain, and organising secretary of the National Association of Voluntary Part-Time Church Workers, the NAVPTCW. She moved speedily and impressively from meeting to meeting, punctual, precise, pugnacious. And it was not only her range of words that made her so powerful, it was her connections. One brother was a judge, and the other was a bishop. Her sister, now dead, had been principal of a ladies' college. She herself was the daughter of an underwriter and the granddaughter of an admiral. Somebody's bashing away some things. It stopped working for me, says the lovely Julia. How are we doing? Is it? Are we? This is a buffer-free zone. Not buffering here, says Charlie. Nice to see Richard enjoying a book today. It makes all the difference. No, just me buffering. Oh, right. Julia says it's not working for her. Or did you say it is working for you? I can't see your comment. Oh, God. Bloody phone. My internet went down. Oh, right. And she said the chat's gone down. Has the chat gone down? Are we still here? All okay. Good. Excellent. Fantastic. Right. Sorry about that. And it was not only a range of words that made her so powerful, it was her connections. One brother was a judge and the other was a bishop. Her sister, now dead, had been principal of the ladies' college. She herself was the daughter of an underwriter and the granddaughter of an admiral. One uncle was a major general, the other, deceased, had been an actor. Thus she was able to speak with full tribal authority, saying, "Edmund doesn't think so," or "Augusta would never have heard of," whenever commerce, war, land or sea, advanced studies, the stage, theology, or the law came into the conversation. And there was ever present the threat that the first whiff of argument the entire family was ready to rally around her. Not that Dr. Trump had the slightest intention of attempting to argue with the lady. Didn't he at this moment owe her everything, even the cup of tea that he was holding to his lips? Wasn't she the patroness who had raised him high above the others when the rest had failed? Wouldn't it therefore be sheer common sense, at least for the time being, to agree, to conform, to acquiescence, regardless of where her strange, exalted views were leading her? Or him, or all of them? Did it really matter so much if ecclesiastical embroidery were made compulsory throughout the girls' side from the age of 5? What was the harm, the damage to these future citizens if stool ball instead of cricket persisted in the playground? The boardroom of the hospital was a rather imposing chamber, panelled up to waist high in a highly polished redwood that might have been sawn from the trunks of old pillar boxes. It rose soaring and majestic to an arched Gothic roof that was held together by criss-cross metal stretchers, from which 3 gas burners of orthodox ecclesiastical pattern were suspended. The chairs, too, owed much to the Gothic inspiration. Usually high and narrow with hard wooden seats, their backs rose up sheer and pinnacled. And a ridge of deeply embossed carving that ran across them at shoulder-blade height made lounging unthinkable. There were, in all, 8 chairs of this design, with an even taller, almost throne-like stool for the chairman. This last was a notable and important piece of woodwork. Rising to a height of nearly 5 feet, it carried 3 pinnacles, as against the mere 2 of the others, and had arms as well. This chair, together with the long deal table and the plain stool at the far end for the secretary, completed the furnishings. This morning, only 5 of the 8 chairs had occupants. On Dame Eleanor's right sat Dr. Trump himself. Next to him, with his hands nervously gripping the table edge as though to preserve his balance, was perched the Reverend Philip Chigwell, a pale, apologetic creature, curate of St. Mary Magdalene, Putney Hill. Beside him, ancient Stertorius, I guess that must be. Beside him, ancient Stertorius, and surrounded by perpetual aura of medical camphor, was placed Mr. Chitt, a retired tract publisher. On the other side of the table, the company was similarly arranged. Opposite Dr. Trump was seated Canon Larkin of the National Orphanage Council, a hard-scalped and highly respectable administrator who was acknowledged to be something of a wizard with charity finance. And last of all, facing Mr. Chitt, sat Miss Emmeline Bodkin, the last living descendant of the founder, and herself already in her 72nd year. Her electrical acoustic aid in its leather carrying coat was on the table before her. Dr. Trump ran his eyes round the assembly and smiled inwardly. He could see at a glance that, with the possible exception of Canon Larkin, he had nothing to fear from any member of the committee, and even Canon Larkin, tactfully and adroitly handled, might prove a friend, an ally, a supporter. It was the first board meeting. It was his first board meeting, and he wanted to make a good impression on everyone. "Could we not begin by opening the window? That is, unless Dr. Trump wants us all to be boxed up." It was Dame Eleanor who had spoken, and Dr. Trump rose hurriedly. No, not at all. Quite the contrary. I mean, yes, just as you prefer." He was already halfway over to the window by the time he'd finished speaking. But before he'd reached it, Dame Eleanor had spoken for the second time. "Where on earth's the man off to now?" she demanded at the meeting at large. "Why can't he ring for somebody?" Dr. Trump blushed. To hear himself referred to in this way was dreadful. He must, he realised, be making the worst possible impression. Dame Eleanor would surely despise him. There was, therefore, only one thing to do: assert himself. Accordingly, he squared his shoulders, he advanced boldly and opened the window to its fullest extent. Then, triumphantly, he returned to his place. "So much quicker doing these things for oneself," he began. But Dame Eleanor had interrupted him. "Too much," she said. "We may as well be sitting out in the playground." The blush that had begun to fade immediately remounted to its full scarlet and suffused his neck. He rose again and went back over to the window. In an absurd, childish fashion, he was, he realised, afraid of Dame Eleanor. Whenever her dark eyes turned on him, he felt himself a mere choir boy again. It was from his grandfather, the Admiral, that Dame Eleanor had inherited that particular glance of hers, and Dame Eleanor took after Grandpa in more ways than one. The overlong nose, the nervous tick of one eyelid, the sideways corner of the mouth, the pleated and protruding chin, all belonged as much to the bridge as to the boardroom, and it was as though deliberately to avoid any possible misunderstanding that she allowed herself to wear as ostentatiously feminine a hat. Small, veiled, frivolous, and it was perched on the neat white hair like a butterfly resting on a spent flower. But already Dame Eleanor was glancing down at the agenda, and at the first item she froze. "Bathrooms?" she said, incredulously. "The place is full of bathrooms. The place is full of bathrooms. Why do they want another bathroom? What's it for?" Dr. Trump cleared his throat. This is one for the isolation block, he replied. He had learnt by heart the particulars of this item and was now confidently reciting them. Hadn't he sat up all night going over the details? The nearest bathroom is in the junior girls' block across the courtyard, he went on, and in this sort of weather... Dame Eleanor tapped sharply on the table with the pencil. Why should the doctor choose this moment to start bathing fever patients when it's raining? Dame Eleanor demanded. There was a pause. Dame Eleanor turned sharply to her chair. Well, Dr. Trump, why should he? She insisted. Canon Mallow thought it was necessary, Dr. Trump began weakly. Canon Mallow managed without it for 17 years, Dame Eleanor reminded him. I can't see why he would want it now. A dutiful titter, the regulation murmur of applause that runs around a boardroom when the chairman has been witty, greeted this last remark of hers, and everyone turned tormentingly towards Dr. Trump. Dr. Trump smiled, too, a faint, dutiful smile. Postpone for further examination, Dame Eleanor said sharply. She glanced rapidly round the table as she finished speaking, and 5 heads nodded in turn. Canon Larkin pursed his lips approvingly. Then Dame Eleanor turned again to the agenda. Now, we come to the new kitchen boiler, she remarked. You seem to want everything new this morning, Dr. Trump. What was that, Dame Eleanor? What is that Dr. Trump wants? The question came from the elderly... Oh, yes, this is elderly Miss Bodkin. What was that, Dame Eleanor? What is it that Dr. Trump wants? The question came from the elderly Miss Bodkin at the far end of the table. In the dim world of sound, she was perpetually groping, stumbling and falling. And this morning her electrical apparatus was not functioning at all helpfully. It needed a fresh battery, perhaps, or it may have been something that was wrong with one of the little valves. Everything new, Miss Bodkin, Dame Eleanor told her. Everything blue? No, new. New what? Dame Eleanor glanced down at her watch. Because she wore it pinned so closely to her bosom, she had to consort herself to see the face. And what she saw alarmed her. At this rate, the other meetings, the Junior League of Innocents, the Unmarried Mothers, the NAVPTCW, would all be upon her before the ancient Miss Bodkin had understood. She turned to Dr. Trump. Write it down for her, she said. Dr. Trump caught the eye of Dame Eleanor and smiled understandingly. Then, taking out a gold-sheathed fountain pen that had been presented to him by the troop of the Boys' Brigade that he had once commanded, he wrote rapidly in his large cursive script on a piece of paper. Meanwhile, Dame Eleanor's eye had roved suspiciously farther down the agenda. "We'd better come back to this one later," she observed. "It seems to be a general extravagant competition this morning. What is the meaning of item number 3, Dr. Trump?" Dr. Trump consulted his own copy of the agenda. Improve facilities in the girls' lavatory," he began. "I can read, thank you, Dr. Trump," Dame Eleanor told him. "I want to know what it means." Dr. Trump felt Canon Larkin's gaze fastening itself on him, and his blush returned. It's the fittings, I believe," he said miserably. Dame Eleanor was now glaring at him. "Basins or pans?" But before he could reply, however, Miss Bodkin had spoken. "Why does Dr. Trump want a new boiler?" she asked. "He doesn't," Dame Eleanor snapped back at her. "Not now." "Oh, but he does," Miss Bodkin persisted. "It says so here in his own handwriting." Dame Eleanor tapped hard on the table with the pencil. "Order! Order!" she said. "We're dealing with item 3 now. Senior girls' lavatory." Miss Bodkin uttered a deep sigh. But why do they want a boiler in the lavatory? She asked. It seems a great deal of money. They're not going to be given one, Dame Eleanor assured her. For a moment the little box responded nicely, and the information appeared to pacify Miss Bodkin. Sorry, just seeing all this text coming up. That's yes. I didn't know it was being given, she replied. That's different. Is it Dr. Trump who's giving it? She turned her head in his direction as she said the words and smiled gratefully on behalf of her ancestor. Dr. Trump shook his head and made a gesture of disavowal with his hands. Already, however, Mr. Chitt had anticipated him. Leaning forward towards Mrs. Bodkin's apparatus, he addressed it loudly. No boiler, he shouted. Then why has Dr. Trump changed his mind? It seems all very sudden. Dr. Trump recognised this for his opportunity. He would sort out this misunderstanding, and Dame Eleanor would admire him for it. Raising from his place, he went down to the far end of the table and pointed with his forefinger at the items on Miss Bodkin's agenda paper. Not item 2, Miss Bodkin, he said, speaking slowly and clearly as though Miss Bodkin were lip reading. 3. There was a brief pause. 3 boilers? Miss Bodkin asked. All in one lavatory? It was then that Canon Larkin intervened. He had a rich, fine voice in his time, and it had filled cathedrals. Clearing his throat, he spoke over the head of Mr. Chigwell. We have left the question of the boiler, he explained. This is something new. Miss Bodkin's frown of puzzlement returned. But it can't just be something new, she pointed out. It must be a new something. Basins, Canon Larkin boomed back at her. Or pans, Dame Eleanor interjected. Dr. Trump doesn't seem to know which. Canon Larkin pursed his lips up again. Then I move the matter be put back till next meeting for Dr. Trump to investigate. Do you hear that, Dr. Trump? Dame Eleanor asked him. Investigate. Yes, I will. I'll ask the matron, Dr. Trump replied. He resented Canon Larkin's attitude and was deliberately cold in the matter of his reply. But Dame Eleanor would have none of it. Nonsense, man. Go and look for yourself. You're in charge. She paused and continued to stare hard at him. Dr. Trump found himself wriggling. Then Dame Eleanor resumed. I am afraid, my friend, that you are being hoodwinked, she told him. They are taking advantage of you. Dr. Trump's hands were tightly clasped together, the knuckle joints showing white under the strain. You mean about the lavatories? He asked anxiously. Yes, and the boilers, and the rest of it. You are here to curb expenditure, Dr. Trump, not encourage it. Everyone turned in his direction and looked accusingly at the spendthrift. It's always the same with the unmarried man, Dame Eleanor went on. They're onto him in a pack. They were with Canon Mallow. What you need is someone who can see through them. Do you mean an assistant? Dr. Trump asked eagerly. I mean a wife, Dame Eleanor reported. Someone to put an end to this nonsense. What this place needs is discipline. And there's a good place to end. That was a difficult scene to do with all those different people. I hope I managed to sort of convey the overall thing. And we're on chapter 5. Ooh, chapter 5. Something interesting is happening in chapter 5, but we'll have to wait till tomorrow. Anyway, let's just have a quick look at what you were saying. I went to school, says Lisa Fishbourne, in Old Coulston. I think they still play stool, all in Sussex, though. Philip Hammond says, I play stool ball at the school in Stenning. Justine Jones says it's a Sussex game very similar to Rounders, but the bat is a different shape and the wicket is a small square on a post. Where does the stool come from? First recorded in cricket match in Sussex. Not seem to remember that it was something blah 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 blah. Every day is a school day. Never heard of stool ball until now. Ben Reeve, Goodwood's cricket pitch is one of the oldest and still in use. There's a match on Thursday, a day before Goodwood revival. Players are better at driving them than they are at cricket. Milkmaids used to put out a milking stool as a target. I once recall... Yes, Mrs. Bodkin sounds like a comedy character in the making. Good. Well, I hope you're enjoying it. Anyway, there's elements in it. It takes a bit of getting going because there's a lot of characters to get into, and then the story starts to unfold. But I think Norman Collins liked his different characters, and he liked this sort of funny little detail in his way, sort of witty. I think Richard's done a video which features stool ball. I did, yes, in Dunkton, one of the Dunkton ones. Very good reading. Great voices to the characters. So, yeah. Anyway, it's coming up to 5 o'clock. So that's all for today. We'll carry on with the story tomorrow if you enjoy it. I like Lady Ellen. It sounds like a strange sort of busybody, doesn't she? So there we are. Anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to see you all. Keep yourself nice and warm. And I will continue with Children of the Archbishop tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Happy New Year to you all. By the way, there's no Vogue show tonight, so have a wonderful Happy New Year. Look after yourselves and enjoy your celebrations, whatever you're doing. I'm probably not going to be doing terribly much. I'll probably end up in bed early after doing a little bit of research and wondering if I'm going to go out filming or whatever I do tomorrow. But anyway, enough of my problems. Lovely to see you. Take care and thank you for joining me today. Till next time, bye-bye. Bye-bye.